This is a really weird story, but like a real core part of who I am in terms of bridge building and cross-culturally and otherwise. I was in junior high, went to a school, big multi-level school, this big staircase, two like huge double staircase. And I remember one day I walked up the first flight of stairs, which was probably like 20 something stairs, getting ready to go up the next flight. And as I put my foot right on that first step of that next flight, there was something that came over me that was like a realization of how beautiful human beings are across the board. And that was straight from God. Like it was not there 2 steps earlier, but it was there on that first step. And I've had it since. And it was like, the best way I can describe it is like a gift of almost seeing human beings a little bit closer to the way God sees them. It's like, man, people unfortunately miss out on a lot of really cool relationships because there is some initial friction right out of the gate, and then stuff kind of deteriorates from there. And a lot of times I think it's just, we just don't see each other as fully human as maybe God would want us to.
All right, welcome to another edition. This is just one of those really cool editions of Journey to Freedom because Jason and I have had the opportunity to spend some time together over the last year, and it's just been phenomenal. When we think about our journey to freedom, and one of the things that you probably heard me talk about during this podcast, and things that is dear to my heart and wanting to do, is when we were able to take a trip to Alabama. And it was, it's kind of coined as a civil rights tour, reconciliation and justice, really kind of understanding a little bit about our roots and where we came from. And it's a trip that I was able to go on my first time last year, and then I repeated it again this year. Jason was able to go on it this year. We were able to take a group of Black men. There was 18 of us that were Black men that were there, and then there was another, disbursement of whether they were women or I think there was one Black female that was there, and then several white men and women that were there as well. But it was a great integration. It was a great way to experience Alabama. And I don't know, and Jason will get to talk about this in a little bit, but I was so shocked when I went to Alabama and realized that I felt like I was back in 1970s. Well, I don't remember the 1970s. I was 5 or 6 years old in the 1970s. You were probably even younger if you were even born in the 70s, not the 80s. But, just to think of all the things that you read about, that you learned about maybe in history, or learned about from our parents, or learned about from the community, and to go truly experience it, and feel like the atmosphere. I was telling my wife Renee just yesterday, like when I went down there, I felt like my word. So I'm doing 100 words that every adult should know. And my word yesterday was palpable. And the word that is that thickness of emotion that you can almost reach out and touch. And that's what I got there. So we will talk about that today. But what I'm really excited about is Jason and all the wonderful things he's doing, and how he's interacting with people, and how he's helping people. And like all of our guests, I've asked him to tell us his story, where he grew up and what he did, and how his life has meant. And then we'll talk about maybe some obstacles or some things that maybe got in the way, and then where he's going next. Because what you're going to find is as I continue to do these shows and find Black men who are successful. Successful doesn't necessarily mean the amount of money you have, or the cars you drive, or the material stuff. It's how you are impacting the community that you're in. And we got to see each other at church the other day, and it was just like, man, this is a person that I want to continue to spend some time with. I want to continue to get to know. And I just see our lives intersecting with each other over and over again. And I can't say that about all of the guests. I can't say that there's some of the guests that I had that I probably won't interact with ever again. And it's not because they weren't, they weren't fun to be with, or, there's a couple that just said some things that I'm like, oh my gosh, how could you believe that way? Or how could you think that way? And I don't fault them for it. I mean, we all grow up in our own experiences and learn. but there are people that are part of your pathway and where God has put us. Part of what I try to do is help people find, why God put them on this earth and help them be able to, encapsulate that and do that and have reasons for it. And so I can't wait to have this conversation with you. I'm going to let Jason take over and kind of just tell us your story, a little bit about you and where you're from. And I can't wait to chop it up after that. So the floor is yours.
Oh, man. Well, Dr. Arnold, I really appreciate the invite. This is like, I was hearing about, I think, the first 2 or 3 podcasts about a year and a half ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I don't know many podcasters. Maybe I can count them on one hand. And so you've been on this journey and 150 plus. So I'm super excited to even be part of that group. And yeah, man, I mean, I think our initial interactions were probably 2 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
And I had heard about you like probably 3 or 4 years prior to. Everybody thought that I already knew you. So they would just talk about, oh, do you know Brian? I'm Brian. I'm like, hold on. Who's Brian? What Brian are we talking about? And so finally I got a chance to connect with you at an Issachar event probably 2 years ago. And so, yeah, our satellites have been orbiting closer and closer, and I'm looking forward to really getting to know you in the months and years to come here. So it's been great, man. So you mentioned in terms of like story, like backstory, what's
your backstory, who you are, because what I found as I've been doing this podcast, and when I think about listeners and what listeners has told me, people want to know what you do. I mean, because we always talk about what do you do and what do you do. But I think what people really want to know, what helps develop trust and helps develop a character is like, who are you? What is it that makes you tick? What makes you go? Yeah. Can I relate to that? And especially when we're working and talking with, folks of color, Black men who have kind of, whether they've been marginalized or they just grew up in different situations, or, people want to say, yeah, that's kind of my story too. And I was able to do that. Or, somebody, I didn't have any issues either. My mom and dad were great. And, we spent all our time with them. And, because not everybody, when we think about a lot of folks from our country, we all think that we all came from, the single mom family, poverty. Yeah. And we had to scratch our way out of it. And simply that's not true for all of us. Yeah. And so but other people can relate. And so really just kind of want to know who is Jason Tucker? Who is this that's across from me right now? Yeah. So I grew up in a really loving family. Parents, fortunately, are still here. They're in their mom just reminded me the other day, she's like, I'm not 80 yet, Jason. I'm not 80 yet. So dad is early 80s. Mom is, I guess you'd let me not even put her out there like that. So, yeah. So they're seniors and grew up in Minneapolis, apparently right up the street from where Prince grew up. I never really tracked it down in terms of which direction that was, but right in the north side. So if you've been in Minneapolis, any major city has a kind of like stigma area. I guess in Minneapolis, north side would be that. But north side represent. That's where I grew up. And grew up in a Christian household. A disproportionate amount of my family are believers in Jesus. And followers of Jesus, and like in a real kind of way, like it shows up Monday through Saturday sort of way, in addition to Sunday. So that really informed a lot of who I am. And but growing up in Minnesota in a Black family, we lived in a Black neighborhood, but you go 10 minutes in any direction, you're gonna be the only Black person. And so early on, I just grew up learning some soft skills in terms of how to connect with other people that were very different than I am. And those skills still are used today. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting place because it's very nice. Like they talk about Minnesota nice, and it is.
But when you're kind of on an island like that, culturally speaking, it's got some interesting dynamics to it. So,
Well,
and then
I did hear you just say that you grew up in Minnesota in a black neighborhood. And when we think about Minnesota, we really don't think like there's like 5 black people in Minnesota. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
I think about like North Dakota, South Dakota, I think of like maybe Native Americans in those.
Yeah.
But not like the black Mecca where there's this black, like Prince is the only person that I can think of other than some athletes or stuff that were,
right.
Black that came from there. So there had to be, plus it's cold, right? And
yeah,
most people that I know that are black don't want to be nowhere near the cold, right?
Yeah. It's very similar to Denver, which is where I'm at now. Been out here for 20 years. And it is very similar where the macro state, the population numbers are almost the same in terms of there is a black community here. There's a Latino community here. But it's like a very specific area. And, obviously in the last 10, 15, I shouldn't say obviously, but that's changed in the last 15, 20 years. But yeah, there is a community, but it's very small. So, yeah.
So you go to high school and
North High, represent Polars.
And anything special happened in your high school years that were contributing factors to the person you are?
We had a lot of fun in high school, probably too much, but I went to it was a public school, but a really, really strong public school because they had a really big kind of media, tech. It was STEM before STEM, and then we had really strong athletics. We won some titles, basketball titles, and I think recently won some football titles. But it was it was the school to go to, and it happened to be like right at the street where I live. But yeah, it was very formative, and it was majority black school too. So it was probably, I'm guessing, I'm kind of throwing these numbers out. It might have been 60%, maybe it was 40% black, maybe probably 40% black, 30% white, and 30% everyone else. And so those numbers might be a little off, but yeah, so it was a real, it was, at the time I wasn't a fan of high school. But looking back, man, it was kind of nice. We had a lot of fun, and I was in a rap group for a couple years there, and did a whole bunch of much maligned freestyling in the locker rooms and the lunch rooms and all that stuff, and played I shouldn't say I played on the football team. I practiced on the football team for freshman year, so that was fun. But it was kind of typical, in terms of like my high school, where I was at in the hierarchy. What lunch table did you sit at, Jason? I was at the nerd table, the hip hop, boom bap, freestyle table. That was kind of like where I lived, and so. Yeah, we're the far opposite end of where all the cute girls were hanging out. So,
gotcha. It seems like it was a great experience to just to be in a place you grew up and you felt safe. I think that's where a lot of folks especially in our culture that didn't feel safe and didn't have that diversity. Like for me, I grew up here. You're familiar with Denver now, so I went to Cherry Creek High School. And at the time, high school still had 3,500 students, as many as they have now, almost 4,000 students. But there were only 30 of us of color in that school at the time. So my dad had been part of an affirmative action program, so we moved out to the suburbs off of Arapahoe Road 925 out there, back when like Arapahoe Road was a 2-lane and all the roads that ancillary from them were dirt roads. And so that was in 1970. And so I grew up as not having an identity and figuring out like who I was. And, so I'm thinking you're talking about the lunch table where you're at the nerd table. Well, we had a couple tables. So we had different buildings that were not just one lunchroom. We had 3 different buildings that have lunchrooms in it. And depending on your status, it would determine like which even building. So there's one that's called industrial arts. And that's where like a lot of the black kids who were like musicians and artist type and that kind of stuff hung out with. And that was most of the black kids. And then there was the main cafeteria where all the athletes were at. And then it was just the black athletes that got to hang out there. And so I was literally confused. I didn't know, like, okay, on Mondays and Tuesdays, I'll sit in this cafeteria. And then on Wednesdays,
because you were a track guy, right?
I was a track guy and started with football at one point. And so I was a good athlete. So they wanted me at their tables. They wanted me to go to their parties and wanted me, but I couldn't bring all my other friends because they wanted, at the jock table or whatever it is, they didn't want the band guys at the jock table. So it's just, that was my crew. It was like, but I wanted to hang out with them, right? Because they were cool to me. And so, when we think about all those identities that we create for ourselves, and as you come out of it, so you're doing this and you're I don't know, you're feeling like, hey, I fit into this group, and now you're going to go to college or start life afterwards. What was your identity like that you could do anything, or was it like, I don't know where I fit in? What kind of? Yeah,
some of the language you mentioned in terms of feeling safe, I think it's interesting because we're a lot of us folks of color that grew up in cities that had a whole bunch of stuff going on. There's almost a razor's edge between whatever safety means because culturally, yes, physically, not so much. You know what I mean? Like, so like our school, it had a lot of beautiful things, like a lot of areas that are kind of under, just financially, just
low income areas.
There's all this other stuff that comes with that. And so, there was a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but there was like, if you were to say, what school would you physically feel the least safe at? It was probably my school, you know what I mean? So, but when you're in it and you know all the people, you kind of know how to traverse the area and kind of what to do and what not to, generally speaking. Yeah. But it would catch you even if you did know that stuff. So it was, and we had drive-bys and we had, but when I went to college, it was like the opposite. So I went to a really great school, Dunwoody Institute of Technology. And I want to say they had a couple thousand, maybe 1,800, 2,200 or so graduates per year. But they had probably like 5 to 8 black people.
Yeah. Okay.
The whole school. And maybe 5 others, everybody else, Asian, Latino, Native. Wow. So you would see people down the hallway and be like, yo, what's up, man? I see you. You know what I mean? Like, so the safety got inverted where it was definitely there wasn't anything jumping off physically in there, but it was like, there was a lot of just, it was conversations that were like very eye-opening for me, like coming from where I grew up and going into that environment where it's kind of like you could tell people felt like, how'd you get in here? And they felt empowered and emboldened to like pressure test your ability to navigate and what you knew and what you didn't know. And you could tell like I think you grew up, any minority globally probably has that skill where really quickly whether or not you're the first person like that someone is dealing with.
Yeah.
And in those environments, you've got a high ratio of people, a lot of people that you could tell you're their first real encounter. And that goes for any kind of minority. Like you could say socioeconomic, say someone who's maybe disabled, someone who maybe has an accent, whatever. Like you go down the list, and if you are the other, you can quickly tell how many other people have interacted. So at college, it's great school, really rigorous program. Really loved the time there, but it was like, yeah, it was culturally really tough.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a kind of a guidance counselor that kind of held me down, man. And he was part of a program that was, I believe, initiated by the school to help bring more minorities through. And so he was a brother too, and I would go to his office down, in the hall and just kind of decompress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We weren't even talking about. We would talk about academics and we talk about class and homework and grades and all that, but it was the majority of our conversations were related to like, how in the world am I trying to survive all this stuff, and how did you do it, and how did, what I mean, like all the like trying to just and I grew up with a dad. My dad's still around, and like 90 something percent of who I am is him. Mm-hmm. Like I'm so much like him. It's kind of scary. Wow. But he's like I respect the heck out of him. And he's like one of the wisest people if not the wisest I've ever met. And so I grew up under him. And so I had all of that going into that environment, but it was still like, man, it was pushing everything to the limit. And so you just, but anyway, that was good training ground for the market. And through all of that, still leaning on those early childhood skills that develop in grade school. Mm-hmm. You learn how to communicate with folks that just have not ever ran across, or at least seemed like someone like you for any length of time, and build relationships with those people. So one of the things that I have, I still remember I was in junior high, I was 7th grade. This is a really weird story, but it's like a real core part of who I am in terms of bridge building and cross-culturally and otherwise. I was in junior high, went to a school called Franklin, and big, like multi-level school, this big staircase, 2 like huge double staircase. And I remember one day I walked up the first flight of stairs, which was probably like 20 something stairs, getting ready to go up the next flight. And as I put my foot right on that first step of that next flight, there was something that, and I was 7th grade. So what was I, 11, 10 years old, something like that, 12 maybe. There was something that came over me that was like a realization of how beautiful human beings are across the board. And that was straight from God. Like it was not there 2 steps earlier, but it was there on that first step. And I've had it since. And it was like, the best way I can describe it is like a gift of almost seeing human beings a little bit closer to the way God sees them, where there's just an inherent, like, I'm just fascinated and intrigued and appreciative for people, even if I don't agree with them, even if they're, and that's a gift, man, because it's a gift that's been tested, over the years, definitely. But, and that's just, I've carried that with me, because it's like, man, people unfortunately miss out on a lot of really cool relationships because there is some initial friction right out of the gate, and then stuff kind of deteriorates from there. And a lot of times I think it's just, we just don't see each other as fully human as maybe God will want us to. So
that's so true. Ooh, that's good. That is good, because you were able to see that early, and then I bet that changed the way that you looked at people and interacted with people.
Yeah.
Based on seeing them as this beautiful creature that God put together for a purpose. And
yeah.
when you start thinking about that's huge. If you see that person as that compared to, is this my adversary? Is this somebody I can compete with? Is this somebody that, I have to watch out for? Somebody I don't trust? But if you see them as God made them, then now I want to get to know them. I want to get to see what
Yes. What is their story? What's really cool about them, and what are they struggling with, and what are there things that I have that I can share with them, and there are things that they have that they can share with me. And when you think about this stage of life, most of us start off with that kind of wide-eyed view of other people. We're like, I remember we had all kind of like different types of people in grade school, and I didn't see them as, they were just different people. And it was cool. But it's at junior high where that stuff starts to shed, and you start to learn about these markers by which, in theory, we can kind of predict people's behavior and outcomes and how they're going to interact with us. And we start to get, kind of like protective, and for a lot of good reasons. But that got derailed by that moment for me. And I was able to hold on to and then grow that still like childlike wonder around human beings in general. So, yeah.
So you go to this college that, you're trying to figure out who you are and, come up with an identity, I guess, for who you're going to be in the future. You graduate, and somehow you end up here in Denver, Colorado, instead of in Minnesota. What kind of transpired that one had you, this is what I can do, this is what my life's going to be, and then to move across away from family and everybody else? What went into all that? How did that transpire?
Yeah, man, just like fire in the belly, So I went to school for drafting and estimating, and wanted to do all the Frank Lloyd Wright designy stuff, architectural wonderment, and that degree doesn't really facilitate that. It's like a very utilitarian. It's a fantastic degree because it was 2-year school. That's all I have in terms of my formal training. But it's more technical. It's more kind of brass tacks. Learn how to draw, which I love. Learn how to draw a home. Learn how to draw the details of a home and all that stuff. But that wasn't like enough. And I was like, man, I got to push past it. I want to design stuff. And so I just kept pushing that. Probably in too hard in some ways, in retrospect, in terms of like inner office dynamics and all that. But just like a real, just fire, man. Like I was talking to my sister a couple weeks ago, but I feel like I've never had a normal weekend. Like I've always done extra stuff vocationally on the weekends and then even at night. That just is kind of like, so I've always worked like at least a job and a half. And so I was pushing a lot of that design stuff and ended up doing some other kind of tech-based things just when the internet was starting to really come online. And there was some technical things that I was doing that got the attention of some of the home office folks who were 2 or 3 states over in Michigan. And they ended up offering me a position to do kind of a regional thing with some of that tech stuff that I was doing at the place that I was working in. They offered me a position in Denver. And so I remember it was, late? I think it was January 21st, 22nd, 71 degrees in Denver. We were down in the tech center, which is, for everybody who doesn't know Denver, it's a kind of one of the tech hubs, southern metro of the city. And we were at this, restaurant, lunch, whatever. They were kind of walking me through the city, and I was there for like a week, just checking it out. Do you want to move here, Jason? Kind of stuff. And here's all the stuff. And, here's what the city has to offer. So we went to lunch, and we were in the parking lot, clear blue sky. Again, January 21st, 71 degrees, can see all the way to the mountains, blue cap mountains or white cap mountains. And I didn't know anywhere in the nation was 70 anything in January, especially late January, from Minnesota, because I think it was like negative 20 something when I left. I was like, oh man, I think I might be able to rock it out here. So I ended up coming out, and it was great for a year, and then the housing market imploded, and there was a bunch of layoffs and a bunch of, you know, destabilizing things, but that's what got me out to Denver.
Okay, cool. I want to kind of, pivot a little bit to, and then I want to jump into faith because, I kind of started the show talking about, our trip to Alabama and the thought process of, you're part of these groups, you're part of, now you're integrated into our society, you're in Denver, you're a Coloradoan or whatever we call ourselves. I was born here and don't even know what we call ourselves. Everybody,
I was like,
are you native? Are you native? Yeah, I was born here, but yeah. Okay. But then we go back into the South because we heard about the South. Maybe kind of just talk a little bit about your expectations before you went, and then some of the things you may have learned that are so different from a Minnesota or so different from a Colorado.
Dude, oh my gosh.
Else that you just go, this is our country. I mean, maybe just kind of give us just a quick overview of the process there.
Yeah, that trip was a gut punch and a hug kind of at the same time. And so Scott, who's the executive director of Issachar, you guys put that trip together. I was telling him leading up to it. I mean, he literally he asked me like 3 different times. So Jason, are you going to make it out there with? I was like, man, I was dragging my feet, man. Cause I was like, my sister and I had another conversation about this a couple years ago, but we were like, man, I can't watch another one of those 12 Years a Slave movies or any of that civil rights, any of those stuff, man. I'm like, my emotional, I think this hit after, this is post Floyd. I was just like, man, I'm tapping out, man. Like I don't have the emotional bandwidth to do all this stuff business wise I'm trying to do. And then try to keep my spiritual stuff in some form of order. And then you turn on the news. I'm trying not to be unplugged from that. So I watch the news,
sporadically,
little bits and pieces throughout the week, and all of it's fantastic stuff happening there. And so, man, I was like, I already knew what the trip was going to be. I was like, yeah, this is just going to be a bunch of like dive back into yesteryear and a whole bunch of like heavy. I was just like, I don't have it. I don't have the reservoir. So I'm glad that Scott didn't listen. And so the going in, I was like, all right, well, let's do it, because I'm not like, if you go on the spectrum of like politically, socially active would be like, super. Yeah, I mean, I hate to throw out the term militant just willy nilly, but let's just say that's a 10. Then you got 0, which is like, I don't know what the heck's going on. Everything's great. I'm probably more like 4 to 5 range, where I'm like, it's hard to get me out on some Capitol steps. I'm not like, it's just there's different ways that I'm trying to move the needle for my family, for the folks from my village, culturally speaking, for the folks from my spiritual family, for people in general, artists and stuff. There's different groups that I, advocate for. And so, yeah, I'm just not like, I was like, man, I don't know where my head is going to be going in and where it's going to be coming out. And so I'm trying to do stuff for just to hold myself together through all of this. And I got a bunch of mentees and stuff that I want to be in a good spot for them. And then my family, anyway. So going in, I was like, that was where I was at. The trip itself was amazing. and super informative. And I think big picture, and then coming out, the relationships, you guys brought a huge contingent of brothers that were very, it was just, it was really good that you guys were there. I'll just say that. You know what I mean? Like, for me personally, that's just, that's, you know, just to be able to, again, coming from my experience where I'm used to being the only black person, and that's been day one. That's Colorado, that's Minneapolis, that's the thing. So just to not be that through going, you know, learning about all that hard stuff was really helpful. And it was a lot of the stuff that I had heard about, read about, saw movies about. But it was so much more real when you're there on the grounds and you're walking through the cities that still just architecturally and in other ways still look and feel similar to some of those times. And so, yeah, that was, it was transformative and it was hard. And, you know, I used to always wonder why my dad moved to Minnesota, because he's from the South and we got a bunch of family, Memphis and Arkansas, and you know, a handful of folk out in Texas and whatnot. So our crew is down there. That's where you know, and I used to visit, our family used to visit down there like once every year or two growing up. So, but I was always like, man, like when we would go down there, we would go to the mall and we would go out. Whenever you see all these black people, you just be like, yo, man, and then why did dad move all the way to Minnesota? Like, and this is the trip where I was like, oh, I get it. And I'm not sure if that's why he moved was because of all that. But for the first time, I felt like I would have made that same call. And I'm not sure, I don't know what that says, but I get it, man. So I got a lot of folks that are still down there and they're still representing and rocking it out and doing the thing. But yeah, it was just really, it was rough, man.
Cool. Well, and the reason I asked you that is because I want to kind of talk a little bit about what does it mean to be a black man in America in 2025.
Yeah.
But somehow without that experience, we might have had a totally different answer before that, you know, and then without being able to kind of give some context to maybe some of the thought process. I know for me, it has changed how I look at other folks of color or other black men and think about what they may have gone through because it wasn't my experience. Right? I went to a white high school that had 30 black folks out of 3,000. I had my own struggles and my own people calling me names and all that kind of stuff, but not at the extent where I don't know if I ever believed it was life and death. You know, they might have called me the end, they might have done stuff like that. But then I think about some of those folks that I could have crossed the line, or I could have crossed the street, and my life would have ended. Or I could, you know, in those circumstances, or just the amount of hate or stuff that was there. I don't know if I felt that growing up. And then I think, okay, how does that translate now to where I'm at now and what I've been able to do and the education that I've been able to get, and how has that affected me as I'm now talking to some of the folks who were, you know, in these situations. You know, whether it's the South or whether, you know, a small, real poor community in New York or something. It changes my perspective a little bit.
And how do you balance like the information overload of it all with the, okay, now I'm doing whatever, the next call, the next meeting, the next whatever, with a bunch of people that had nothing to do with that. But there's like this tension between the things that the ripple effects of all of that stuff that still show up today, and you're heightened in your awareness of it and other people may not be, other maybe people may not even acknowledge it. Like, how do you juggle that?
Oh, I love that question because it kind of feeds into the next part that I want to talk to you about it with, is because I see when my faith now kicks in and my, the circle where I'm at, I see the more of the need for grace. I see more of the need for the understanding. I see more of the need for patience than I had before. I don't see especially with folks now who have had ancestors or had people that came before them that taught them things, about us or about different people or about different cultures through not understanding, right? Just because they were their father told them and their father told them, and that's how they have to act, but never had to actually face it themselves. I think of the school that you went to where it was the first time many of them were interacting. Then I think of our tour guide, our tour guide's dad, who said, I grew up 20 miles from here and didn't see any Black folks, for I don't know how many years.
Yeah.
And the city's 85% Black. So how did that segregated for them? Yeah. And so the grace that I think comes from that helps me now with my interaction in my relationships. And when I whether I'm talking to somebody who's white who just hasn't had any exposure, or I'm talking to a Black man who's super angry because of some of it is real and how he was treated. And I think about now I listen to my mom and my dad tell me stories of drinking out of colored drinking fountains, and my uncle getting beaten just because he was drove off the wrong, side of the county or something like that. And I go, okay, none of that should have happened. None of that. But at the same time, the folks that are alive now aren't the ones who did it. We just have to make sure they don't perpetuate it. Right. And so that thought process, then it gets to, how do I now help understanding? How do I help, them to feel, not even feel, but, when they ask questions, I don't get mad at them for asking the question, because I truly, how do you not know? Well, you didn't grow up in my house, right?
Yeah. And I'd love to do a dive on what you just mentioned in terms of the feel part. What I alluded to earlier, there's a conversation, a legitimate one in the Black community. Well, I think it's in a number of communities, but it's kind of like, at what point do I have to stop worrying about how people feel? And so what I was alluding to earlier in terms of the soft skills that you grow up learning is you learn how to make other people, at least I did, less on edge because of whatever their perceptions are around you as a person and all of the things you bring to the table as a person. And in this case, some of those things are your cultural background. And so there's a lot of Black folk that are kind of at a point where they're like, look, man, I don't care how comfortable or uncomfortable, that's a you problem, if blah, blah, blah. And I haven't settled on that myself. I'm curious on, from a faith standpoint, when I'm thinking about Paul saying, I became all things for all people, so that, and it wasn't so that they would be nice to me, but so that they would, let me not misquote this, but mainly so that there would be inroads or at least a bridge to be able to share the life transformative stuff of Jesus with other people. And so how do you balance that, all that olive branching, but sometimes you're not always folk are waving those olive branches away and saying, look, I'm not trying to see things your way, and I don't care whatever you're talking about. And how do you juggle that, I guess?
I would say, one of the things that a pastor told me, a really good friend pastor of mine told me, that hurting people hurt people. Hurting people hurt people. And so I always, when somebody's lashing out or saying some things that are just off, first I wonder, are they hurting? And if I can get to the bottom why they're hurting, we may be able to come together with a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But then I get to people who are just, it doesn't matter what race they are, what culture they're from, they're just bad people. They're evil people. And I don't have a lot of tolerance for that. I don't have a lot of, hey, I've reached out, I've tried to have a conversation, and you are just, I'll just say, you're just stupid. And so then now that conversation is no longer, that relationship. And maybe that's just on me where I'm not reaching out anymore. I'm not trying to resolve it because there's this genuine, you don't care. You're going to do what you're going to do. And then you might even try to take advantage of me and my kindness and my niceness.
Okay.
And so that's where, hey, I can reconcile with God or whoever and say, look, God, I reached out. I know you said do it 70 times 70, but I get like 70 times divided by 7. I'm not there yet, right? It's like, no, I don't, because it is hard. It's that balance where you go, okay, this is where, and I am aware of all the things that happen. Are you? Like this weekend, I was at the state track meeting, and I was talking to a history person that gives the history, and he's teaching junior high kids. And, he's going on and on about our founders and that kind of stuff. And I said, well, because we learned, about what Dr. Mack had told us about George Washington. And they say, so what kind of history do you give about George Washington's teeth? Oh, that they were wooden and he had it. And I said, well, no, he took them out of a slave's mouth. He put them in his mouth. And, and so are you even looking at other ways of sharing history? Is history only from the person who conquered? Is that the only perspective we get to see or we get to know? Yeah. And if that's the case, then it's really hard to have, get into a relationship, that you and I can be in if all you can see is what you've been taught.
Yeah.
And all you can see is and that's not just taught from school. I'm saying it's taught from your parents, it's taught from your community, it's taught from wherever. I
feel like there's like a curiosity quotient that it's needed, where if you're the expert coming and going on everything, it's tough, man. It's tough. Yeah. And I think that slice can be majority culture, that can be minorities, that can be different socioeconomic, that can be spiritual conversations of a bunch of different groups. But it's like, I think the frustration that a lot of people, myself have included, is like, man, like we can't. So in some ways, I'm part of groups that are like that. Like I feel like guys tend to be like that. I feel like Christians in general in the West tend to be like that. We're just the experts. We show up, boom, we got it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of majority experts, culturally speaking, that just live that as well. And so in certain ways, I'm on the side where I'm like, oh man, I need to do a better job of not doing that. And other times I'm seeing it done and I'm like, yeah, they need to do a better job of not doing that. Cause it's like, everyone knows this mathematically. You talk about 10,000 hours and time is one of the main objective things that you can say relate to a person's ability to speak into something with some sort of authority and some sort of insight that should be listened to, right? But like my college experience and a lot of our experience, you have people that are experts on you that are just meeting their first Black person, you know what I mean? Or, and it's like, how are you such an expert? And so it's just, we gotta show grace, but also remind folks that, like, man, you gotta be a little more curious about what's really going on that might be outside or might be in a blind spot or might be outside of what you've seen up to this point. And then like, I think as a believer, as a Christian, we're majority in this country and we carry ourselves sometimes that way and just like plow through a whole bunch of stuff and not asking any questions. Oh yeah, everybody gets under blah, 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 blah. And we're not as curious as we should be.
Absolutely.
And so, man, I just feel like there's just a lot of curiosity that is needed, that a little bit more listening, a little more asking questions, like legit, like real, like I really want to know, and just sitting back and letting it wash over would do
We'll
a
do
lot of good.
Yeah, I try to show up in conversations, and I think I heard this from Myron saying it at one time. He said, every conversation I'm in, I'm 100% right. I'm 100% right that there's a 50% chance I don't know what I'm talking about that I do. I'm 100% right about that.
That's pretty good.
If I'm right, and we can go through this conversation and show that I'm right, and my belief systems are well enough that I'm going to defend them, then I want to continue to say, okay, this is why I'm right. But on the other side of it, if I'm wrong, I want to be able to do the stuff to correct that.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we lack is we don't want to correct because that means that we've been wrong for
however long.
Time.
Yeah. And that goes back to that beauty of like, people are fascinating and amazing creatures, and they are made by God. Mm-hmm. And they've been bopping around earth, learning and accumulating knowledge and wisdom. Mm-hmm. And it's so cool to learn from other people. Like you literally are getting like old school Nintendo, those books that you used to get the code, the cheat code, where you get extra life, you get extra board, or anytime you're interacting with another person, that's an opportunity to learn stuff you would never in your own shoes be able to learn. And it's just so cool because God is blessing everybody with various different things that they can share with the collective.
Yeah.
And if we're just kind of outright saying, man, I already know about your folk, there's nothing really here for you to teach me, then like we're losing out.
Yeah. And I think where the fear comes in, and the older I get, the more that I know I don't know a whole lot. But the fear comes in is when I interact with you, if I have this fear that somehow if you learn or get what I have, then it's going to take away from me having it. And it's this whole thing of lack.
Oh, wow.
We spend so much time, whether it's subconscious or consciously going, if I share with you, if I give to you, and then all of a sudden now you get what I have, that means you're taking it away from me. Instead of God as a God of abundance, and there's a
right.
for all of it, right? And I look at our division in our country right now, and I say, okay, we got to take all this stuff away because these folks are getting to the point where if they get all of our jobs, if they get all of our, which will never happen, but if they take our culture, if they take all of this from us, that means we don't have it anymore. And so I'm nice to that person. I try to understand that person. I'm giving away something I may never get back.
And it's so, isn't it interesting how we, on one hand, can acknowledge that we are the wealthiest and the most powerful nation, arguably, that's ever been, and possibly that is right now.
Yeah.
While we also can still be afraid that we don't have enough. Mm-hmm. And, humans have figured out how to survive and thrive on a lot less than we have.
Yeah.
So there is and particularly if you're, if you hold that while also being a believer and follower of Jesus, where Jesus like, don't worry about the birds of the air, I got them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Don't worry about what clothes you're going to wear, I got you. Like it's like we're really believing in ourselves more than we're believing in God when we're thinking there's not enough to go around.
Yeah. You're so right.
Yeah.
We'll just pivot a little bit more right now, just because I want to get to, and this has been an amazing conversation. We're going to do this again at some point. But I want to kind of, give the opportunity for you to kind of really talk about you and what you're doing and what makes you excited about life. And, I can see that you're very thoughtful and that you're thinking about how do I interact in this world. But what are some of the things that, we got to, college, and then you moved to Colorado and you want to do architecture and you got your faith, and like, what is it that Jason's doing now that it just makes life even more exciting?
Man, I'll tell you, I feel like I'm in the groove and have been for several years right where God wants me to be.
Oh, that's so cool.
I can't tell the future, but I feel like this is so I've always been kind of a creative, artsy person, which goes into architecture stuff. And so coming out of the housing market implosion, when I moved out of architecture, I ended up getting into graphic design and started to launch my own company, JHT Design Studios, and 15 plus years ago, and really have a love for creating artistic things, a love for people, a love for God, a love for connecting people in a way that is honoring to God. And so I ended up doing, and still am with my main company, JHT Design Studios, a lot of branding and identity websites that are all about the story of my clients.
Mm-hmm.
And their story is really about the story of their clients. And so helping them tell that story through design is what I do. And that keeps the lights on. Storytelling from a service-based standpoint. And then several years ago, I launched a storytelling company that's product-based. And so that is scratching another artistic itch of mine. And so we're still ramping that up. And the company is called Group Lore. And we use imaginative storytelling to spark fun faith conversations for young people, specifically like middle grade age students and a little bit older. And so at that age where they're starting to really form a lot of their big picture identity around some of the questions that they're asking, and like getting answers, gathering answers. It's that coming of age stuff, Joseph Campbell, all of that. So, and I love it, man, because what we're trying to do is facilitate conversation, which I think is something that universally could be acknowledged as a need and maybe a muscle that's kind of atrophied in a lot of ways in society. And I'll raise my hand as a Christian. Like, I think we do conversation poorly. And I think we've, in the last probably 5 or 10 years, cliff falled. We were already bad at it. But I think it's just, and so what we're trying to do is bring healthy conversation back. And specifically around faith exploration. Mm-hmm. And so we're using these fun science fiction stories to do that. And it's like all the stuff that God has made me to do, stuff that have some aptitude for, but stuff that I'm just really passionate about as well. And all mixed together, and we're doing some really fun stuff around that.
Oh man, it sounds so fun and cool. Like you're making an impact in a way that a lot of other people aren't. When everybody's going in one direction, you're finding ways to get into a relationship. You're finding ways to help people. I think because we start gravitating towards all this technology, whether it's AI now or whatever it is, and you're utilizing the technology to bring us back together.
Yeah, we want to have. I mean, I haven't dove into we've talked some AI stuff. I think you're further down the approval train than I am on that. I have some very strong views on AI from a cautionary tale standpoint. Mm-hmm. But in terms of technology in general, yeah, we're embracing it because that's where young people are, and we're taking the approach where, what did Jesus do when he and his disciples were doing their thing first century? They were going to where people were, not where they wanted them to be. And then they were forming relationships and having conversations and asking questions and eating and hanging out and sharing some insights on occasion. And that's what we're trying to do. So we want to use the technology because that's where young people are. Mm-hmm. And then what we're doing is taking this story that's leveraging that technology and then bouncing them back off of the devices, which all of us are addicted to, and they're no different, into real relationships. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of each of these episodes, these stories that Group Lore creates, you have kind of like a series of trivia questions where you're able to actually ask story-based questions about faith and about life and about philosophy and about your own personal story just off of the story you just read. And so this is, again, and it's science fiction and it's fun adventure stuff, but we're able to bounce off of that back into the who are the people in your life. And so we want to facilitate small group conversations and family table conversations and mentor-mentee conversations off of something that's fun and venturing, but then allow real stuff to happen off of that in real life, off the device. So that's what we're doing.
Cool. Oh my gosh, there's so many really incredible things that we've just been able to dive into, and we're kind of at time. What didn't we talk about that you want to make sure that you shared with the folks that are going to watch this episode? My goal or my dream would be that you and I get to have some more conversations where we really get into the philosophical portions of it and why things happen, how we can help others. And at some point, I believe you could be an incredible podcast host where you're bringing people in and having these conversations. Not that that's one more thing to add to your plate, but it's on. Oh, good, because you turn this conversation around.
Picking your brain, so
because you started asking me questions, and so that tells you that you got that heart for knowledge and curiosity. And so this conversation, for those of you who are watching, is far from being over, and it's far from being over where you get to be a part of it. But at the same time, what did we not talk about that we want to make sure during this episode? Is there a way to find out about Group Lore? Is there a way to, find out other stuff you're doing? Because I want you to make sure that if people do want to, they can communicate with you.
Yeah, I would love for if anyone out there listening that has a young person in their life, again, like middle school or even early high school, or maybe even a little older, but basically are into fiction and imaginative storytelling and wants to have a faith conversation and finds it really hard and really difficult, given all of the complexity that we're all juggling. I would love for them to drop by grouplore.com and take a look at what we're doing over there, because we're making this for parents, mentors, Christian educators, and just young people and young people at heart in general that want to explore some of the deepest questions that we have in life about what is going on in all of this brokenness in our world, and is there hope through all of that, but also really love adventure and story and cool sci-fi epic stuff. So that's what we're trying to do over there, and we'd love for you guys to check it out.
Oh, cool. So grouplore.com is the website to go to. Please check it out. Jason, this has been an amazing conversation. I can't wait to have more with you offline and online as we begin to unpack our purposes here, why we're here, and why God put us on this planet. I think this is such a good spot for us to be able just to have these conversations and talk, because the more of these conversations that can be had, the more of these conversations that we can begin to talk about relationship and why God put us here, the better we are as a society. And so you are, I love the example that you lead. I love the things that you're doing for the community, and just can't wait to talk to you again. So for those of you who have not subscribed to this yet, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the notification button. Hit those some really good folks that we get to talk to on a weekly basis that we're putting out a couple times a week. We're putting out these episodes that people can be a part of and interact. So any closing thoughts? I'll give you the last word, and then we will be out for this episode.
No, man. Blessings. God's not, he's not surprised by any stuff going on. So move forward, plow forward. Yeah, he's got us.
All right. So for these out there, don't forget that you are God's greatest gift. He loves you if you allow him to. And we can't wait to talk to you on the next one. Have a great and wonderful day.